Alright, in this video I want to show you how to make custom components and also show you a reason or some reasons, hopefully, why you would want to do that. In order to do that, I also have to give credit to the usual way of making knobs and parameters and stuff like that in JUCE, which is mostly by using JUCE slider and the corresponding attachments. So I think the most elegant way to do that is by making a new struct or class, whatever, that has a slider and its attachment, and then like pass the ranged audio parameter to it, then do all the things to the slider that you want it to do, and also attach the attachment with the slider and with the ranged audio parameter of it. And when you then make an object of that and give it the ranged audio parameter in here, then it will immediately do its thing. You see I'm making visible the slider and also setting bounds. And then when I run this thing, it does its thing. It has its range from -60 decibel to 20 decibel. And that is, I can show you here, exactly what I defined in process block. See, I have the audio processor value tree state with its well-known parameters, and one of them is create parameters. And you can see in here I have this routine that creates my parameters, and one of it is in fact a gain parameter from -60 to 20 decibels. And yeah, also some other parameters that I will show you later. Yeah, this looks pretty cool. It is just one thing in the initializer list, one thing in the constructor, one thing in resize, just how I like it most. And all that required me to do to have it so nice in here was making a little struct in here, and I could add more information to this. So let's check a little bit deeper what's going on here. So this is a slider. And it does everything that you would expect from a slider. It even already comes with a nice little look and feel if you're too lazy to make your own one. And one thing that I always like to talk about in my plugin reviews is actually sensitive drag. So in JUCE slider, sensitive drag is being implemented on CTRL, even though I like it more on shift. So let's hold CTRL while normally dragging. Boom. And now it's sensitive drag mode, and I'm dragging very slowly and precisely, and then I let go of the button again, and I keep on dragging, and then CTRL again, and I can sensitive drag further. And this is actually new in JUCE, because when I started developing with JUCE, then the slider was not able to go into sensitive drag mode within a drag. You had to decide before starting to click on the knob if you want to have sensitive drag or not, and that is a problem that I still see in a lot of commercial and free plugins out there, and it's often an indicator that it was made with an old version of JUCE, but the new version of JUCE actually has this feature, which is awesome. And it almost made me think that I was wasting my time making my own knob and parameter types. But then I realized that there is still something missing about the sensitive drag. Let's use mousewheel for just normally changing the value, and we see we are going in some weird step. Obviously that makes sense, because when you're using a normal mouse and not a trackpad, then things are not smooth. So we are using the mouse, and now we want to use the mouse again, but with sensitive drag. So I'm holding down CTRL, and yeah, still not sensitive drag. So sensitive drag is not implemented for mouse wheel movements for JUCE slider. And what are our options to go about that? Let's see, slider.sensitive. Let's see, get mouse sensitive, no. Get slider snaps, no. Get set accessible, no. Set bounds inset, no. Set mouse drag sensitivity. Distance for full scale drag. Distance the mouse has to move to drag the slider across the full. Oh, that's a really interesting way to define sensitive drag, I have to admit. But still, that's not actually what I was looking for. So sense. Yeah, that's kind of weird. Can I at least do something with shift or something? Like I don't even see the method anymore where you can change that sensitive drag is being triggered by shift instead of CTRL. I know that this method is somewhere in here, but I just don't see it. That is not cool. Also not cool that I cannot be more specific about what happens with the mouse wheel movements. And at this point, it already forces me to make my own slider, which I did. So let's just check this out. I will undo this. Now I'm using this gain slider instead, one self-made gain slider, and comment out this one, and instead get this one in. Comment out this line, or actually, yeah, I can keep it, but just remove this stuff again, and also down here. But everything else stays the same, and as you can see, this looks also pretty nice. There's just one argument more in here that I did not have in here, which is a tooltip, because I just defined that all my components have a tooltip, an optional tooltip by the way, so that a tooltip component can always paint what's going on with the thing you hover. You will not see that in action now in this project, because it should just show that customizing components can do more than just adding sensitive drag, you know. Anyway, let's play this back and see what happens. Okay, so now first of all, we see a different style, and I will explain why, and then we can also see that the things that happen are the same. And now if I hold shift, I get into sensitive drag mode, and if I stop holding shift, no sensitive drag anymore. Now shift again. Blub, blub, blub. Now mouse wheel. Normal mouse wheel. And now sensitive drag mouse wheel. Sensitive. So that looks reasonable. Oh, I just realized my mouse wheel movements are actually a little bit finer than the one in JUCE. Feels a little bit clumsy at the moment, but it's actually very easy to fix. Also, it was just a freestyle. It's not the same thing that I use in my plugins, but kind of very similar. Now, what did I do here? Let's just go through this little header file that has less than 200 lines. Is a namespace called comp, and there is just basically a component where I inherit from JUCE component. And the idea of this is that you can give all your components like a certain base functionality. Like for example, you could now go ahead and say mouse enter JUCE mouse event override. I think it's const. Yeah, and now let's just imagine that we have some sort of utility class in here, a reference to the utility class, so that we know that all of the other components that will be based on this component also have the reference to the utility class. So you can just say utils set tooltip and then set a reference to this tooltip. You have to imagine this. This would mean that no matter which component we are hovering over, this will always make sure that the utils always knows which tooltip is currently the one that should be displayed in the tooltip component, you know? Because then the tooltip component will also have a utils object and read from the tooltip pointer actually. It's just as easy as that. This is already an improvement to the normal component, and then you can base everything on it, like label. I made my own label. I just decided that it does not need a tooltip, and it has a text, and it draws the text. Now it draws the text in a rather fancy way with rounded rectangles and with a string width that always considers the length of the text and stuff like that. And that's why my custom component has in its constructor set buffer to image true, because that makes sure that there are less repaint calls only when they are explicitly called by the programmer, and not whenever two overlaying components have a little bit of transparency or something like that. There is a macro that you can use to check how often your stuff is repainted. And you can activate that in the producer, and then you can see how many repaint calls you get with or without set buffer to image. So I was told set buffer to image is actually less performant when the component doesn't do a lot of things in its paint call. But I noticed that the way I construct my paint calls is usually very complicated, even for simple things like labels, because I just like to be fancy. For example, here I'm just making multiple rounded rectangles that are within each other to make it look cool and stuff like that. So it's worth it for me that the base class of my component has set buffer to image true, and this is false for the JUCE component. So just for this, it already made sense to make an inherited class. Going on to the knob, this is a little bit more than the other two. First of all, the member variables. One thing that you always want to do if you have a custom parameter is a ranged audio parameter reference and its attachment. Obviously, because you've seen that in the slider example as well. But the difference is this is not a slider attachment, but a general parameter attachment. So you can use this for every parameter type, which makes it much more usable in my opinion. Then I have a little lambda for the on-paint procedure, and I have a little helper variable for the mouse event functions, and you will see that I think I will start with the paint function that only consists of this lambda, where I give it this object and graphics context. And the cool thing about this is that you can have functions that return what should be going on in this lambda, for example, all this stuff. And yeah, you could have multiple of these objects, just call them in different ways, like 0, 1, or actually giving them reasonable names. And then you could experiment with different ways to draw your parameter just by changing what's being passed to onPaint in this constructor. And in the end, just calling onPaint and paint, and then it will be the thing that paints. And I think that's a really nice way to define the painting of stuff, because then you can switch around between different ways and see what works best. This is already a little bit of a different workflow than using a slider, because obviously you are directly manipulating what should be painted and you don't have to navigate a look and feel class to sort of know what to do. Yeah, it's also a lot of fun. Like, you have to really think what you want to do if you want to design your own parameters. Like, let's check this out really quickly, just because I'm proud of my little freestyle design that I came up with. Okay, so we're getting the value. We're setting the font to a little bit of bigger size. We make name and value. So the name of the parameter is gain, and another line, and then we get the convert from 0 to 1 value, so that we have denormalized value in here, and then we are painting that in the center of the parameter. And I did that on purpose, because if you know the JUCE parameter, then you have probably noticed, at least that's something that I immediately noticed when I was learning JUCE, was that when you call set text box style JUCE slider text entry, then the first thing I noticed was that there is no text box inside also because I just wanted to draw the value inside of the knob and not below or above it, because I thought I could save screen space like that. And I also imagined this to look just pretty cool, and I think I was right about that. I think it looks pretty cool to draw the value inside of the knob. Only problem is when you make it small, then you have a problem. But yeah, I gotta think of it, what I like about it and what I don't. But all in all, I think it's pretty cool. When you can get away with it, it's cool. Obviously, it's not cool that it draws so many decimals here sometimes, but it's just a freestyle. Actually, I could wrap get value current value as text. Yeah, I mean, this is what this function is for, right? Let's check it out. Yeah, that looks much better. Great. I defined a thickness and width and height, just same as the bounds, but as float. With this method, I made sure that the bounds are only a quadratic thing of this whole rectangle. Then I drew the ellipse that is around everything, and then I made a radius that is a little bit smaller than the radius of the whole ellipse, so that later when I'm drawing the arc, it will not draw over the ellipse that I already drew, but a little bit inside, of course. This is basically the value of my angle is the start angle plus the value times angle width, because if we look at start angle, this is tau times 0.5 plus tau times 0.125, and that has the following reason. If you think of the value 0 in terms of angle, that means it starts up here. So I wanted to shift it, first of all, half the parameter, which is pi, and then another eighth, so that is pi divided by 4, and in terms of tau, that would mean tau divided by 8. So this is actually just shifting it over here, and then the angle width, so from here to here, is tau times 3 divided by 4, and yeah, you can see that represented here because the value is normalized. As you can see, we're getting the value from the ranged audio parameter in a normalized way, and then we can instantly use these things in the add centered arc method that just asks us for the center, the radius. We can add a value to rotate the whole thing, but I don't like to do that because it's confusing. Then there is a little tick here at the end, and that was done by making a line from the center to the point where the value is currently sitting, and then shortening the start so that we only have this little stuff. Instead of drawing this line, we're going from the current arc's position to the start of this line so that it fits to the stroke type that we were using. Now let's actually try different values for this thing and see what happens. You can really shape the way your look and feel works in this way, and yeah, I don't know, it's a little bit too much. I think I will just go back to what I had before. After all, this is not a tutorial about drawing parameters, even though I do want to make a video about that because it's just fun. But you know, it should just show that you can go about this in different ways. And at this point you might still ask yourself, yeah, but I can do that in look and feel as well. I would have all these controls, all this information is available in look and feel. Why would I do that in the paint method? Yeah, the reason is because you might extend the functionality of your slider at some point. For example, I'm a huge fan of modular plugins. Plugins like Serum, if you look at them very closely, they have a little dot at some point. In Serum it is up here, and in kilohertz stuff it is floating around near the slider. But all in all, it kind of belongs to the slider, and it shows the current modulation depth, for example. And some plugins like to visualize the modulation depth on the slider itself. Other plugins like to visualize it next to the parameter, and yeah, there are different ways to go about it. Or other things like in TDR Kotelnikov, a famous compressor, if you don't know, at least for everyone who likes free plugins, it shows the gain, the input gain of the signal on the threshold slider, to show the people where they could put the threshold slider for it to be reasonable. You know, there could be additional information on a certain knob, and you want to have this information in your paint routine. So it would make sense, in my opinion at least, to have a custom knob where you can just put new information as member variables, and then the paint routine would have direct access to that. It is just inside of the knob and not outside of it, and it knows everything about it. And if you were to inherit your stuff from JUCE Slider, then the look and feel of JUCE Slider would still only be able to use with JUCE Slider, and everything else that you wanted to add, you would have to add as a property, which is kind of weird in my opinion. Now let's go on with the other things. You can already see it a little bit up here. I have defined some constants like how much sensitive drag should slow down the drag intensity, and one thing about how strong a wheel event should be. I think I will make it a little bit stronger though. So how does it work? People sometimes tell me it is very hard to make a slider. It is a really hard thing to do, especially because of all the edge cases. So let's just check it out, how hard it is currently in here. So mouse down. The mouse is being pressed down, a mouse down event. The attachment sends begin gesture and therefore tells the host, yo dude, I'm starting to drag this thing. The value might change. So drag Y is a little value that I have here, and it says event position Y divided by the top level component height. Now I'm not sure yet if this is the best way to solve this, but I will tell you really quickly what it means, what I was thinking about when I did this. Basically, my idea of this was, let's say you have a bunch of parameters in your project and they are very small, and you drag it and you see that acts kind of sensitive even when you drag it hard. And then you might also make them really big, and now you have to drag very far to get to some point, and it's kind of tedious, you know? But obviously you will rarely make a knob so big. It will more or less work like this, that you have your UI designed in a way that the parameters should end up at some height that is more or less like this. And then for some users, depending on their screens, it will turn out that the parameter, that the plugin is a little bit bigger. So they will be using the resizability to drag it down. And some people with very large screens will have the plugin look a little bit smaller, so they will resize it the other way around. But all in all, they will all end up with having something that looks a little bit like this on their screens, or like this. So the users will automatically define the size of the plugin to make the parameters have a reasonable size. And then it will make sense that the size is dependent on the height of the window, because it will be relatively the same for everyone, except if someone feels very edgy and always wants to work like this, but then it's their own fault when it doesn't work like intended. At least that's the way I'm thinking about it currently. Maybe I will have a better solution at some point. But yeah, I do have to say which problems I still have with my custom component approach. I cannot just say that it's the best thing ever and call it a day. Mouse drag. In mouse drag, I'm getting a new drag value with the same method I used for drag Y. At the end, I will replace drag Y with new drag so that I always can ask for the difference between the two. And this difference is actually what changes the value. As you can see here, value is rep get value plus difference times sense. And sense is just if shift is down, then sensitive drag, and else 1, so that it modifies the depth of the difference. And then I just say attach set value as part of gesture with the converted value from 0 to 1 to its denormalized value. At the end, when mouse up, so when the mouse button is lifted, then we check if Alt is down, or we can also check for CTRL if we wanted to. And if that is the case, then we will go back to the default value of the parameter, and then we will end the gesture. And yeah, if this is not the case, then we will not change any values anymore. So this is a very easy functionality. We can already see this in action. Let's see, dragging, now clicking and holding Alt and letting go. Okay, kind of doesn't make sense here, because if we want to reset to a default value, we kind of expect this to happen only when there was no drag. So we just add event something with drag, blah blah blah. So mouse was dragged, not end. And this is already showing what everyone is always saying about custom components. There are so many edge cases and you don't think of them, and therefore it is too tricky to do. Now dragging, holding and letting go, no default value, just like expected. Yeah. So this is the thing that everyone finds problematic about custom components, that you have to think of all of these things. But my argument against that is that developing a plugin takes a very long time, and by the time that you always debug your code, you will just notice a lot of these edge cases, and the remaining ones are very low in number and probably not very interesting anymore and not very groundbreaking. Now the mousewheel method is also a good example for one of these edge cases. Of course, you kind of get the directional thing, you can multiply it with the sensitive drag, update the value just like for the parameter, but you have to make sure, because you have to set the value as a complete gesture in mouse wheel move, that there is no drag in between. So if any mouse button has been down while this is called, then we cannot go on with these things, or we will get an error because there is already a gesture going on. There are also some other problems with this method, and I really don't wanna pretend like that's not the case. For example, this delta y function. Why is this a problem? Let's debug what's going on with delta y. Alright, so be careful now and check this out. When I'm using delta y here, you see it creates this peculiar number, 0.234375, and also the same number into the other direction, but not negative. I mean, okay, it gives me an information about the direction I am going, like minus for going down and plus for going up. Makes sense, I guess. But why this specific number? What does it mean? It's not that I want to go 0.234375 steps for each mouse wheel move, because that would be a huge step. So what exactly does this value tell me? I mean, I'm using a mouse. It's not that this represents some sort of distance. It is just representing the fact that I'm mouse wheeling into some direction. And that's why I say, yeah, well, it's just 1 or minus 1, and then I'm multiplying that by the wheel sensitivity, and then also by the sensitive mode sensitivity. But there is a problem about that, and I want to tell you about it, because JUCE does not give you a way to tell if the mouse that is being used by the user is a mouse or a trackpad. I want to show you that. The wheel information has delta x, delta y, is inertial, is reversed, and is smooth. And I expected is smooth to return true if it's a trackpad, but it still returns false then. Let's see, int wheel smooth should return false now, because this is definitely not smooth. Yeah, okay, it does not paint anything, which means it's 0, which means it's false. And I can tell you that for a laptop trackpad, this also returns false. So this is not the way to find out if it's a trackpad. Now you could also just try to do event, something like get type or what was it? Mods. I know there is some sort of get type thingy in here. I forgot what it was called. It was not get type, but it doesn't matter because I already tried it. There is no way to tell if the current mouse event comes from a trackpad. So this is definitely far from perfect. It's just kind of a very simplified way to make it work for normal mouses. There might be a lot of different mouses, but even in the case that this is too simple for all kinds of mouses, I beg the question, who uses something else than a mouse? Like, I might be using a trackpad sometimes, and for a trackpad I should come up with a more sophisticated function than this, because trackpads have this cool advantage that their delta y value actually makes sense and gives a reasonable information about what's going on. But for example, I don't care about people who use pens to make music, because that's just silly. Who uses a pen to make music? I mean, if I were to into the mobile market, it would make sense, but I am more into VST plugins, and VST plugins are used with a mouse or with a trackpad. There is not really anything else that is being used in a normal producer at home style context. Maybe some dudes with Pro Tools that are sitting in huge studios for Universal or so, they might use some more fancy sorts of mouses, but do I care about them? I don't think so. That is my custom knob, and you know, it can only go better than this from this point on. Let's just recap this really quickly. JUCE slider is pretty cool, but it lacks sensitive drag on mouse wheel motion, and I do have this feature. And yeah, I also have some other features and workflow benefits like this paint routine that makes it just very nice and convenient to have this custom knob. And now, to further prove my point that making custom components for parameters is cool, I just want to make a little XY pad. And I already started doing that a little bit. It is going to be my crush smacker, comp XY pad crush smacker. So my crush smacker also has a tooltip. It crushes your smacks and it gets 2 ranged audio parameters, obviously. And these 2 ranged audio parameters are the crush parameter going from 0 to 100% with a default value of 12, and the smack parameter, which smacks from 0 to 420 blaze it with a default variable of 69, obviously. And when I'm just running this code now, you can already see it happening. This is my XY pad, and I haven't done a lot here yet. You see, I just define the thickness, say that bounce is bounce to float reduced by thickness, set the color and draw the rounded rectangle. And other than the knob, this thing obviously has 2 range audio parameters and 2 attachments. You know, it represents 2 values, so it makes sense. Now we want to have a way to visualize what's going on. And for that to happen, we have to get our values. Actually, let's also call it val x and val y. Val x times bounce get width bounce get x plus val x position. Now I'm just doing the same for the val y position. Now I can do all sorts of cool things to visualize this. For example, draw rectangle val x position -1, val y position -1, 3, 3. Actually want to fill the rect. So let's check this out. And we get a nice little dot showing us where our value is sitting indeed. Now I can go ahead and define the mouse behavior. For that, I will just copy this stuff. I will probably not use mouse wheel move for this, because at the moment I cannot imagine what mouse wheel move would do on an XY pad. Attach X begin gesture, attach Y begin gesture, and instead of having drag Y, I will obviously now have a point float drag XY. Because now we have to go a little bit more fancy on an XY pad. Drag X, XY. I'm using the same constant for both the X and the Y position so that it sort of behaves the same. I'm not sure if that is like the best solution yet, but I'm just doing that right now like this. New drag XY. So I'm just putting the same stuff in here. And now I want to have the difference. Gladly, JUCE has operator overloader for points. So I can just do this. Now sensitivity is sensitive. And now we can already see a little problem with our nice little custom component approach, because the sensitive thing was defined in the knob, but not here. But we can also already solve this very easily by just putting that here instead. Actually, we can put it a little bit further up to show that this does not belong to the component or label, but only to everything that comes after it, like knob and XY pad, which makes it very clear that this is sensitive drag thing. Now let's go on. Wrap X value. So this is val x diff.x. Cool thing is we can just keep one sensitive value. Attach X, wrap X. I just have to make sure that this also happens for the Y value. Everything easy peasy, I would say. Setting back to the default value, easy. Ending the gesture. And as you have probably already noticed, this is at the moment working pretty much the same as the knob, and we can almost not believe it. And if you have the sense that this can just not be, then you are right about that, and you will see soon why. I just want to show you a way to reason about this, you know? Okay, now you have this thing, and ooh, okay. First of all, it goes into the wrong direction, so we have to turn around things. What if we turn around the difference thingy? Yeah, cool. So, but still, this is not how you would expect an XY pad to work, I guess. I mean, it's kind of cool. You can just drag it anywhere and it will move relatively to the point where it was. It's also kind of a cool behavior. Maybe sometimes you would actually want it like that. And it has sensitive drag. So it's kind of acting very much like a slider, but you would maybe not expect that from a XY pad. But it works. It does its thing, which is cool. It is already a working XY pad. Now, how do we really make this an XY pad? A more reasonable XY pad? Or actually, how do we extend the XY pad functionality to something that can also be, you know, I know how I want to go about this. Enum class drag type. Oopsie doopsie, that comes here. Drag type apps rel. Yeah. I want to make a drag type for absolute drags and relative drags. So we already have the relative one. So drag type, or actually let's just use apps here because we want to debug apps next. This is also a great example for why custom components are so fun, you know. You can just say drag type is apps, if yes, then some stuff, else if drag type, actually I'm not initializing any values here. I can use a switch case drag type relative. Now let's do this. Boom. Actually, before I copy it in here, I want to copy this switch case everywhere. It might not work in mouse drag because of all the variables that I'm using. But anyway, so there are some things that I always want to do, like beginning a gesture and mouse down, definitely. So that's outside of the drag type. So that's actually looking very clean here. What's something that I always want to do? I'm not sure if I always want to do the drag thing. No, that's kind of a little bit problematic because I'm initializing values here. So I have to outsource it a little bit. Mouse, drag, rel. Okay, so what would the absolute mode do? When you start clicking down, it would just let the value jump to this new position. Attach x set value as part of gesture, and now we want to have the relative position, event position divided by get width. We know that the paint method is not actually using the real bounds, but these bounds, and this should be reflected in absolute mode. Rectangle float bounds, and instead outsource our bounds stuff to this place. Now I have access to bounds from my mouse methods, and I can say bounds.getWidth, which looks much nicer than casting something. And I think it would still work the same on mouse drag. And then on mouse up, actually this would still work the same in absolute mode. Now we just need to have a way to switch between absolute mode and relative mode. If mouse was not dragged while mouse down. If is right button down, so right mouse click. I now have num types in it. D is int of drag type. D is d+1 modulo int of drag type num types. And then drag type is drag type of D. This should be some sort of round robin thing now. Let's test this. Okay, so now we have the absolute value and it's kind of what? Where's my point going? Ooh. I switched to relative type. Now switching back. Boom. It always jumps up here. Why? Ah, these have to be denormalized values. This is a good point, a good moment for some of the people who have criticized me for my self-made component, parameter component approach. Their argument was, yeah, with all these conversions and stuff, you never really know if you're doing it right. And that's a good point, because as you can see, I was just confused for a moment. But on the other hand, it's not a good argument, because obviously you will quickly notice when something is odd and then you will change it. Update apps values. Hello, I want to use the rep, rep X, of course. Convert from 0 to 1. Now rep Y. Update ABS values for event position. Mouse up. And now my code looks much more tidy again. Yeah. Switching to relative mode. Okay, that was not cool. While in the process of switching to relative mode, it jumped. Another edge case, but also something that immediately went noticeable. If we're in absolute mode and if event mods right modifier down, we want to break without updating the value, actually regardless of the type, because we don't really need to carry on the drags if the plan is to remove the current type anyway. This still moves, but probably because of the mouse up value. I will take all this, put it here. So if there was no drag, if there was an attempt to make default, then make default, else right button down. Only if none of this is the case, switch case. Okay, dragging in absolute mode. Cool, seems reasonable. Changing to relative mode, worked. Moving, operating relative mode, works very fine. Nice. Sensitive mode in relative mode, works nice. Boom. Going back to absolute mode. Absolute mode has no sensitive drag. Could absolute mode also have sensitive drag? I don't know. Anyway, now we could go on changing some cool stuff about the way this XY pad is being painted. Just like that. We don't have to rely on any look and feel stuff for that. Like, for example, we could make a background grid. Set color, choose color. We define a very transparent sort of white. We just draw a bunch of lines, I guess. Draw line from bounds, get width times 0.5. It's supposed to be bounds get y. It is a little bit the other way around. Get height. I always forget this is not describing the length but the endpoint. Okay, kinda mathy, but let's see. Yeah, that seemed to do the trick, and it looks a little bit more like a graving system now. Now let's get a little bit more creative than that, not just so mathy, and actually draw ellipse. Val expose -4. Now I have to define a thickness as well. Yeah, that looks kind of cool. A little bit thumpy. And now I want to draw lines. Yeah. I want to draw lines from the origin of this thing. Line L0 is going to be from here to... Okay, I basically want to do something like this with shortened start. The thickness times 6. That will make sense. But I need a different value here. So like I want to go from the point to the same X value, but with a new height, which would be bounds get bottom, bounds get Y, get X, get right, and also with shortened end. That should look pretty cool. Let's go. Yeah. These line methods like with shortened start and stuff like that, they are very advanced. They have a lot of geometrical assumptions in them, and I know that this is some sort of sophisticated stuff that has to be looked after a little bit more closely to get an idea what causes the nonce. I'm probably trying something impossible when the line has no actual length. But all in all, if we just imagine that I have already solved this problem, then this looks pretty rad. That's how easy you can make an XY pad with a custom component, except for this little issue here. I think this has become a very critically nice XY pad. I'm currently at just 320 lines and everything is still very laid out and readable, especially in the plugin editor, the place where you really want stuff to be as easy as possible. It also is as easy as possible. A knob, an XY pad, plugin editor, a knob, an XY pad, a tooltip, a parameter, 2 parameters, making them visible, stuff, drawing everything black, setting the bounds. It is as easy as it can get with my custom component stuff. All the complicated stuff is in the back end, and even the back end is not very complicated with 320 lines. That's why I like custom components. You can have all this kind of fun. And yeah, sometimes there are some edge cases, but all in all, it's not just fun, but also yields a lot of potential for cool functionality. Like this XY pad where I sorta accidentally made a relative drag type. Not sure yet if that is useful, but you know, you can just run into things like that unpurposely and then decide to just keep it in there just in case and make it an enum class. And yeah, in this playful way, go on with your development, and at some point you will have a very huge array of things to work with. And I could show you my a little bit bigger projects where I'm also having structures like this, but in a more elaborate way. But I can just quickly summarize what's going on. Like, for example, I have this tooltip thing working correctly. I have the utility also handling some other stuff. I have an event system where all of these components can tell each other what they just did, and then the other components can react if they want to. I have a shared object that's shared across the instances, and that kind of can make every instance repaint itself with new colors and with new cursors, update the colors of the cursors, and all of these kind of details I have in my plugin. And it's all because I'm a huge fan of making these custom structures, you know. That's what enables you to do that, and that's why I like it, and that's why I made this video. I hope I could fascinate some people to actually kind of figuring this out. Even if you are a strong believer that JUCE slider is more stable than a custom slider component, you should just do that anyway because it's fun.